Okay, on Rojava and the Western Left. And this is from the Lion Struggle Collective. This video was inspired by someone on Facebook who is a total puppet of the Kurds and, ignores the fact that the Kurds are receiving funding from the Zionist entity, the U.S., and Scotland, and England, right? And to a lesser extent, Canada. So on Rojava and the Western Left, from the Lion Struggle Collective, this is a 15-minute read, and it's from April 22, 2020. The Western Left has become increasingly enamored with the revolution in northern Syria, known to many as Rojava. Many Western leftists have taken up the cause from creating tweet threads, YouTube videos, podcasts, funding, protesting, and even volunteering for the People's Protection Units, YPG. After the news about Turkey's invasion last year, there were many demonstrations across the West centering around Rojava specifically. With Rojava slowly beginning to reintegrate into Syria, many have even cried out against this as a return to oppression. Apparently, being a U.S. proxy is better than a united Syria. Western leftists have been largely defensive in response to criticism about Rojava and engaged in the same several counter-arguments this time and time again. So let's discuss several key reasons why most Western leftists are being misled about this and address a few key arguments. Is Rojava socialist? Article 43 of Rojava's constitution enshrines private property. This does not necessarily refute the possibility of it having any socialist character, though, as the Soviet Union, People's Republic of China, Republic of Cuba, and several other states have at several times allowed small property as a part of the alliance of the proletariat and peasantry and the process of developing socialized appropriation. But Rojava is not part of such long-term development of socialism. So private property is like capital, right? So it's like the factories, the restaurants, the hotels, stores, stuff like that, farms. Personal property would be like your house, your teacup, right? Your notebook. That's personal property. Private property is like stores and the means of production like factories and restaurants and stuff like that. So yeah, as for cooperatives, they are not socialist in and of themselves. The cooperative Mondragon Corporation in Spain is not socialist. It was even praised by the Fanjalistas as proof that El Caudillo's enlightened rule had eliminated class conflict among the Spanish people, and that class collaboration is possible. Even Ronald Reagan called co-ops the future of capitalism. The Zionist entity had and has cooperatives and agricultural communes called kibbutzim. They are specifically organized as utopian socialist communities intended to exemplify the values and ideology of the once dominant labor Zionist tendency in the global Zionist movement. Regardless of their ostensible socialism, the Zionist entity remained and remains a Western imperialist proxy in Western Asia and an integral part of the global capitalist system. This is the key aspect to keep in mind. Any country's socialist character, or lack thereof, cannot be evaluated in a void. Rather, it must be emphasized that their place in the global capitalist system as a reproducer of imperialist power or an opponent must be accounted for. Socialism is not merely democratic production. In Capital Volume 3, Karl Marx states, the cooperative factories run by workers themselves are within the old, i.e. capitalist form. The first examples of the emergence of a new form, even though they naturally reproduce in all cases in their present organization all the defects of the existing system and must reproduce them. But in opposition between capital and labor, but the opposition between capital and labor is abolished there, even if at first only in the form that the workers in association become their own capitalists, i.e. they own the means of production to valorize their labor. So this means that cooperative factories run by workers under capitalism are still capitalist. Okay? So the workers must, right, own the means of production. If the workers aren't owning the means of production, then it's not socialist, right? And owning the means of production adds value to the labor because you get back the rewards of the work that you put in, right? So what represents a tendency towards socialism for co-ops? Socialism of production and appropriation among them. This means a unified system which centralization, not decentralization, favors. Rojava has a localized cooperative system thanks to their utopian worship of decentralization. This stands as a bad sign for progress towards socialism. In the course of victory of the Russian Revolution, the Soviets were unified into a centralized planned economy. Production and appropriation were socialized. Rojava's tendency towards decentralization is toward decentralization and disfavors such development. Its ideals beat back anything representing a successful path towards socialism. Abdullah Öcalan, in his book Democratic Confederalism, essentially focuses on political processes and rights alone as securing freedom, and nothing about socialization of the economy. Ironically, the anarchist site libcom.org even acknowledges this writing. And here's the excerpt. For Öcalan, socialism and worker struggles are of secondary importance compared to questions of religious and ethnic identity and democratic freedoms. This assessment seems to be shared by many of his followers. When a group of German leftists visited North Kurdistan to see the system of democratic autonomy in practice, a topic like land reform was not even discussed. As part of this class-blind perspective, Rojava fails to even make attempts at disenfranchising the comprador bourgeoisie, a necessity for throwing off the power of imperialism, much less developing in a socialist direction. Unlike countries such as the aforementioned USSR, PRC, and ROC, Rojava remains a dependent proxy integrated into the global capitalist imperialist system. Even beyond socialist considerations, Rojava is not the perfect democratic utopia people think it is. The political system is not a direct democratic utopia within the Democratic Union Party, PYD, and associated parties having a strong influence on decisions. The YPG have suppressed dissenters, indicating Rojava as a state, not stateless society. Every state organizes repression of someone for some end. So what is the case for Rojava? The suppression was largely of people protesting Rojava's Kurdish ethno-nationalism, which brings us to our next point. Iraqi Kurdistan. We will briefly cover Iraqi Kurdistan before moving back to Rojava. The KRG, or Kurdish Regional Government, which governs Iraqi Kurdistan, has engaged in several human rights abuses and oppressive actions. Its military force, the Peshmerga, disarmed and abandoned Assyrians and Yazidis in 2014 as ISIS were approaching. In 2017, the KDP, Kurdish Democratic Party, deposed the democratically elected mayor of Al-Qosh, Faiz Abed Jahware, and replaced him with KDP loyalist Lara Youssef. At least 3 protests were carried out by the residents of Al-Qosh since Youssef's appointment, which received little to no attention on an international scale. There are also the horrific socioeconomic conditions that many Assyrians live in Iraqi Kurdistan. Assyrians in villages do not often receive electricity until midday and do not have access to clean drinking water. Their schools are in disrepair, and a teacher was quoted saying, "We receive nothing from the government except for promises." there has been ongoing suppression of dissidents and journalists. There is also the issue of ongoing land theft. Out of 96 locations in Duhok alone in which Assyrians live, beginning with very small villages to areas of the city of Duhok, 53 locations have been targeted with illegal encroachments by Kurds, and there are over 130 illegal village and farmland seizures across Iraqi Kurdistan. A detailed look at the situation can be read in the report Erasing Assyrians: How the KRG Abuses Human Rights, Undermines Democracy, and Conquers Minority Homelands. Ethnic Oppression and Rojava. Western leftists who are supportive of Rojava accuse people of purposely conflating the YPG and KRG. For Assyrians and Yazidis, there is little difference between the two groups. The progressive facade of Rojava is wiped away when you get down to reality. In 2015, David Jindal, who was the leader of the Assyrian-led Khabur Guards in Syria, was abducted and assassinated by the YPG. This came to be after he initially refused to use the term Rojava, which in Kurdish translate to West, as in Western Kurdistan, stood committed to a unified Syria and spoke out against the looting of Assyrian towns by the YPG and their allies, the Syriac Military Council, or MFS. In August 2018, PYD officials ordered the closure of several Assyrian schools. These schools were under the control of the Syriac Orthodox Church and offered the curriculum of the Syrian government, as well as Assyrian classes for liturgical purposes. These schools were actually also attended by many Arabs and Kurds. In the Assyrian town of Qamlishi, the authorities under the leadership of the PYD decided to expel all teachers and personnel and forcibly close down schools because they weren't following the curriculum imposed by the PYD. So how does democratic confederalism supposedly defend the rights of every ethnicity and religion when it forcibly instructs Christian Assyrians from teaching their own language and liturgy to their children? Assyrian journalist Suleiman Yusuf was arrested by the PYD for reporting on the school disclosures. He was held for at least 4 days and describes the ethno-nationalist policies of Rojava, explaining that Assyrians are increasingly leaving northern Syria. If Rojava is supposedly anarchist and thus against nationalism, then why is their own imposed school curriculum in opposition to this? School materials, rather than support an anti-nationalist conception of community, promote imagery of the Greater Kurdistan. Such an idea, taken with abuses of Assyrian civil rights in hand, is an attack on indigenous and minority rights. So see, Kurds are from Iran, right? And this is up here in northern Iraq, like over by Duhok and that area, is where Assyrians and Chaldeans are from. Like this area is Assyrians and Chaldeans are from there. Kurds are from like right around there, like Kermanshah area in Iran, right? So the Kurds are foreign invaders, but the Assyrians and Arabs are actually indigenous to Syria and Iraq, okay? So just to clarify that. Well, cultural material is suppressed, and educational materials glorifying the ethno-nationalist agenda have been increasingly published. For example, a 600-page book lionizing Simko Shakak, a warlord who led several massacres against Assyrians and assassinated Assyrian political figures, such as the patriarch Mar Shimun, has been circulated around Rojava. Both Iraqi Kurdistan and Syrian Kurdistan, as Rojava is also being referred to, are engaging in historical revisionism, ethnocentrism, and whitewashing of historical figures who have committed egregious crimes. Oh, but there are Assyrians allied with the YPG, and there are Assyrians in the SDF. While Assyrians are present in both groups, like the MFS, imagining that this fact makes anti-Assyrian actions committed by the YPG false or exaggerated is ridiculous. The MFS is largely dominated by Arabs and Kurds. Assyrians make up a minority in the force. Additionally, it is not uncommon for members of an oppressed ethnic group to seek representation in institutions that oppress them. For example, pointing to the presence of African Americans in the U.S. Army or police does not change the anti-black character of these institutions or disprove institutional racism. It is as if supporters of Rojava chose to ignore the existence of tokenized minorities and traitors when convenient to them. Remember that we mentioned Lada Youssef earlier? Despite being a Chaldean Assyrian herself, she is widely reviled by Assyrians for her unjust replacement of Faiz Jawareh as the mayor of Al-Qosh in Iraq. As for Assyrians in the MFS or SDF, many have been forcefully conscripted or threatened into joining. Those who do join voluntarily are not representative of the majority of Assyrians, and often do so out of fear. To opportunistically point towards the product of ethnic violence and conscription of Assyrians in an attempt to disprove ethnic violence against Assyrians is the type of theoretical confusion that permeates the Western left. The role of U.S. imperialism. A further looming shadow over potential for Rojava to develop in a socialist manner is their previous alignment with the U.S. and their constant deference towards them. Rojava cannot exist without the U.S., as it has refused to ally with Syria in multiple strategically essential cases. This represents a complete limit to any possibility of truly revolutionary development. One may try to draw a parallel between Rojava's alliance with the U.S. today and the USSR's alliance with the U.S. during World War II. This is an invalid comparison. The USSR was an independent, self-asserting power when it formed a strategic pact with the West. Its strength and unity was consolidated in the form of state control of both the economy and army. These conditions are lacking in Rojava. In 1995, in an interview with the Middle Eastern Quarterly, Öcalan said, "It is not possible for us to be communists. Why did the Soviet Union collapse and the United States has not? It is because communism made the government everything, but the human being nothing. The United States represents development." Sounds as if Langley, Virginia has been funding Abdullah Öcalan. The creation of the SDF, which is dominated by the YPG, was initiated by the U.S. U.S. Army General Raymond Thomas was quoted as saying to Reuters about the YPG, "We literally played back to them. You have got to change your brand. What do you want to call yourselves besides the YPG?" With a day's notice, they declared that they are the Syrian Democratic Forces. I thought it was a stroke of brilliance to put democracy in there somewhere, but it gave them a little bit of credibility. So this is a literal U.S. Army general, praising the YPG for rebranding as the SDF in order to do ethnic cleansing against Assyrians and Arabs and do war crimes and steal their resources, right? The SDF receives much of its arms from the U.S. and is generally dependent on U.S. support for survival. This dependency seals its fate as a U.S. proxy as it presently exists. Its only option for breaking out of that relation is reintegration into Syria. Rojava has allowed U.S. military bases to be built in the region. Back in August 2017, Reuters reported that the United States had established 7 military bases in northern Syria controlled by the YPG or SDF, including a major air base near Kobani, a town at the border with Turkey. SDF spokesman Talal Silo was quoted as saying they have a strategic policy for decades to come. There will be military, economic, and political agreements in the long term between the leadership of the northern areas of Syria and the U.S. administration. This is yet another sign pointing to the obvious reality that the U.S. is not withdrawn from the region and will not be doing so anytime soon. With the news of Turkey's invasion of Syria in October 2019, It was widely reported that the U.S. was pulling out of the region. In reality, they were merely redeploying, and their bases in northern Syria were not liquidated in any capacity. The revolutionary region of Syria, of Rojava, was in their alliance to the U.S., reduced to nothing more than an imperial outpost. Even U.S. imperialists are open about seeking hegemony in the region in order to acquire raw resources for capital accumulation. The U.S. has outright stated that it intends for Rojava to be another Zionist entity in West Asia, in the region, Western Asia. As such, leftists supporting this project do not make sense and are ultimately hypocritical given their unwavering support for Palestine. Even Zionist squatters allege their fraternity with the imperial outpost of Rojava, in both being arms of Western imperialism and the Zionist entity's interest in exploiting Kurdish grievances to destabilize their enemies. A strategy in line with the general Western policy towards the Kurds. A man famous for being critical of U.S. imperialist policy, Noam Chomsky, even proudly proclaimed his support for the U.S. remaining in the region to back Rojava. It should be remembered that many communist movements and organizations initially supported the Zionist entity, and the Zionist entity was even supported at the time by leftists, the labor Zionists. So history is repeating itself and socialists are making mistakes. Oh, but the U.S. had no choice but to ally with the Kurds. Erdogan has more to offer for U.S. imperial interest than the SDF, which was just a handy tool for asserting U.S. hegemony in the region. They were thrown under the bus because the SDF served their purpose for the imperialists. Now the SDF begs both the U.S. and Assad for the survival of the ethno-nationalist project. Assad's government was the primary ally of the PYD in northern Syria before and up until 2011, when the PYD made an about-face and sought an alliance with the U.S. during the siege of Kobani. They could have remained aligned with the Syrian state in the first place and not ended up in the present conundrum, which is only being solved by the reintegration process. Many may claim that if they continued alliance with the Assad's government, that they would lose their autonomy and face genocide. This argument is ironic considering that is what is happening by allying with the U.S. They became puppets of finance capital and outposts of the empire. Kurdish nationalists have a mixed relationship with the U.S. since the late 1950s. This betrayal that people are speaking of has hardly been the first time. The U.S. will work with them when it is in their interest and abandon them when it isn't. The excuses for Rojava's conciliation to U.S. imperialism rely on arguments that are devoid of historical analysis. Oh, but the sources are right-wing and you're being biased. Are you in support of Rojava out of real investigation or evaluation? How are you not being biased with your views and the sources you represent? Are the sources we have included actually right-wing? For the ones that are, why aren't there leftists covering the issues at hand? And why do they only promote propagandistic sources showering nothing but praise on Rojava, dismissing most criticisms? And what about the large amount of right-wing sources that are positively covering Rojava, including The Spectator? Many of those critics are completely hostile to any critical views of Rojava, have accused critics of saying the Kurds and homogenizing them as a people when this is often not the case. Generally, actions by the SDF and YPG and the KRG are specifically mentioned, and such inexact and inaccurate language isn't used. Ironically, Eurocentric leftists often do exactly what they accuse us of, simplifying the demographics of the region into the Arab world or Muslim world, ignoring diasporas, particularly minoritized ethnic and religious groups. Regarding Turkey's invasion of northern Syria last year, many people discuss this by saying, oh, support the Kurds, completely erasing non-Kurds in the region, particularly Assyrians and Yazidis. Nationalisms. Kurdish liberation from national oppression and their right to self-determination is important. The issue is where Kurdish liberation comes at the expense of indigenous Assyrians who are already suffering a genocide that has been ongoing for over a century. Why does Kurdish national oppression, compared to Assyrian national oppression, receive far more attention? Why is it acceptable for Kurdish self-determination to come at the cost of Assyrian self-determination? It doesn't escape the national antagonisms of West Asia, as the Democratic Confederalists claim. In fact, it merely reproduces them. As Frederick Engels said, as long ago as 1847, a nation cannot become free at the same time continue to oppress other nations. National oppression creates antagonistic social relations, colonizer against colonized, settler against native, loyalists against nationalists. Synthesis of nations cannot be accomplished while national oppression exists, while one nation's benefit means another's detriment. Rojava's system as it stands has no future of synthesis, only continued antagonism. The solution for Western Asia and Northern Africa broadly cannot be in the national liberation of a single homogenized nation. Western Asia and Northern Africa is a region of many overlapping nations, both in geography and diasporas. Western Asia and Northern Africa must make a place for self-determination among nations, whether that means regions autonomous to varying degrees within a state or an independent state. Unless Rojava ceases to oppress Assyrians in the name of a greater Kurdistan and recognizes their right to self-determination, then national antagonisms will be pronounced, not reduced. If you are aware of these issues and continue to adamantly defend Rojava, why don't you engage in self-reflection on that support? And if you are unaware of this, does this information not pose as something that should lead to change in your position? One cannot always be correct. It's better to admit to oneself and to others and to identify the source of one's incorrectness, to undo harm their incorrectness has done, and ensure others don't make the same mistake. In this case, Western leftists need to recognize the influence their own Eurocentrism has on their understanding of the situation. Many people have become overly defensive of a revolution where the only information they listen to is from Western media outlets and the propaganda of the YPG. Most Westerners know little to nothing about WANA, Western Asian and North African nations, issues, or peoples. Before this revolution, many leftists knew little to nothing about the Kurdish people and didn't care for their self-determination half as much as they do now. When they heard the voices of Assyrians and Yazidis crying out against their oppression at the hands of the so-called revolution, they were dismissed as liars or collateral damage. Western leftists spoke over the voices of indigenous people far more familiar with the situation than they are. They say there is no alternative to supporting Rojava, as if Balkanization of Syria and the repression of Assyrians via Rojava is of no concern for this or the only situation. Further, Western leftists, usually incorrect about conflate indigenous Christians oppressed by the homogenization of Muslim-majority societies with the experience of privileged white European and Euro-American Christians in the West. They act as if all Christianity is the same and as if all Christians are imperialists, rather than most European imperialists being Christians. Most of the Western left's opposition to the Syrian state and discussion surrounding the war in general is often guided by imperialist lies and bourgeoisie and exaggeration and bourgeoisie ideals about freedom as opposed to material reality. As such, they wave away all critics of Rojava as Assadist because said critics would rather rightly defend a unified Syria and its sovereignty over an imperialist-backed Balkanized project. When Western leftists are addressed with issues particularly about Iraqi Kurdistan, they state they don't support it. However, this is the only time these statements are made, simply in response to it being mentioned. On a mass scale, there has been no action taken in solidarity with the Assyrians and Yazidis, and certainly almost no lengthy video articles or videos, let alone any major protests. What to do going forward? Marx and Engels, in their early years as communists in the 1840s, believed colonial Eurocentric lies of European colonialism being a developing force in the colonized world. After further investigation into their lives around the 1850s, they began to take a far less Eurocentric position, with Marx expressing support for Indian national liberation from Britain, and the British rule in India. Marx's position on the state changed after he investigated the Paris Commune. He engaged in scientific analysis, not dogmatic reapplication of his old analysis, to avoid being caught making a mistake. Both began as utopian socialists, arguing for socialism on the basis of humanism and moral goodness. After investigation, they changed their position into scientific socialism and spent the rest of their lives critiquing utopianism. They were willing to recognize incorrectness and change their positions accordingly. Do you care more about marketing your image? Do you give greater weight to petty bourgeoisie concerns? Or do you truly care about revolutionary success and national liberation of oppressed peoples? How do you choose to respond to this will reveal the truth of that matter. Self-criticize and change, or continue to engage in Eurocentric depiction for your own reputation. Today, Rojava and Syria have already commenced negotiations for the terms of Rojava being reintegrated into Syria. We hope that reintegration will be successful and the Kurdish chauvinism of the Rojava administration ceases. So you want to click on the links and see some of the sources they have up there? So let's take a look at them.
I like this place.
So this is, I hate advertisements. So this is going to be Reagan praising employee ownership co-ops.
I believe this is where I'm supposed to be.
Stupid ad.
I've long believed that one of the mainsprings of our own liberty has been the widespread ownership of property among our people, and the expectation that anyone's child, even from the humblest of families, could grow up to own a business or a corporation. Thomas Jefferson dreamed of a land of small farmers, of shop owners and merchants. Abraham Lincoln signed into law the Homestead Act that ensured that the great western prairies of America would be the realm of independent, property-owning citizens. A mightier guarantee of freedom is difficult to imagine. I know we have with us today employee owners from La Perla Plantation in Guatemala. They have a stake in the place where they work and a stake in the freedom of their country. When communist guerrillas came, these proud owners protected what belonged to them. They drove the communists off their land, and I know you join me in saluting their courage. Well, in the marketplace, our people benefit from direct and indirect business ownership. There are currently close to 10 million self-employed workers in the United States. That's nearly 9% of total civilian employment. And millions more hope to own a business someday. Furthermore, over 47 million individuals reap the rewards of free enterprise through stock ownership in the vast number of companies listed on the U.S. stock exchanges. I can't help but believe that in the future, we'll see in the United States and throughout the Western world an increasing trend toward the next logical step, employee ownership. It's a path that benefits a free people.
So that's the devil himself, Ronald Wilson Reagan, praising capitalistic employee ownership of working co-ops. What's the other link? Oh yeah, Article 43 of Rojava's Constitution. Let's have a look at that. Social contract of the Democratic Federation of Northern Syria, aka Rojava. Let's go find Article 43. Article 43, here we go. Article 43, the right to private ownership shall be guaranteed unless it contradicts the common interest and shall be regulated by law. That's hella sus. That is hella sus. What other links did they provide for us? That's Libcom, Alex de Jong. He sounds like a Dutch reactionary. Let's see. Was that the one? Yeah, that's the source for this quote. So they gave us that quote already. So Al Jazeera. This is by Andrea Ghigliotti, I think is how you pronounce it. My Italian is not as good as my Spanish or French. Andrea Ghigliotti. Because I think the G plus the L makes the Y sound in Italian. Italian friends, please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay? Gliotti or Ghigliotti, I believe is how you say that. So, and what's this article called? Rojava, a libertarian myth under scrutiny. And Andrea Ghigliotti is an Arabic-speaking freelance journalist and research consultant covering Western Asia. Since its establishment in late 2012, the de facto autonomous region of Rojava in northern Syria has attracted the attention of European leftists, mainly because of the influence of Murray Bookchin's theories about libertarian municipalism on the Kurdish Workers' Party PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan. Öcalan's writings gave way to a newborn political system in Rojava, as the Syrian branch of the PKK, the Democratic Union Party, is in fact the driving force behind its institutions. Bookchin envisioned a society founded on communalism and transnational direct democracy as the antidote to the bureaucratic nation-state, a mission partially mirrored in the wording of the Rojava Charter of the Social Contract. Let's take a look at this. And let's see. And here's the social contract. That's weird how it... So, first and foremost, in pursuit of freedom, justice, dignity, and democracy. So, first, there's no dignity being funded by the United States. There's no dignity being funded by the Zionist entity. Under the charter, we the people... So, pluralism. So, why is Kurdish nationalism being expressed and carried out if the preamble of your social contract talks about pluralism, eh? That's what I'd like to know. That's really what I'd like to know, is why you talk about pluralism, but then why do you carry out nationalism? That's free from authoritarianism, militarism. So free from and centralism. First of all, you need centralism to plan an economy. Communist, socialist, Marxist economy. You need centralism. And then authoritarianism, that's just like anarchist, capitalist bullshit, right? You need some level of authority in a functioning society. And then militarism. If Rojava were free of militarism, then why are Kurds doing ethnic genocide against the Assyrians and Yazidis and Arabs, eh? That's another thing I don't understand. So they're just contradicting themselves there. However, a balanced assessment of the achievements in the Syrian region should not overlook gray areas, where there is still room for improvement against tribal, ethno-sectarian, and capitalist and patriarchal structures. So, ignoring some libertarian aspirations. For example, there is an analysis on the equal political representation of all ethno-religious communities, Arabs, Kurds, and Christians, being the most sizable ones. An approach which some have applauded is careful ethnic balance, although it rather resembles the sectarian quotas adopted in Lebanon and Iraq. The emphasis on ethno-sectarian identities is further echoed in the foundational statement of the FDS, which is based on the representation of community components. As Syrian intellectual Jad Karim Jibai pointed out, nobody knows how an entity that is peoples and community, i.e. clans and ethno-sectarian communities, could transcend national borders. In other words, the insistence on these communitarian boundaries betrays libertarian transnational aspirations. The contradiction is also evident from the authority bestowed upon tribal leaders. For instance, Sheikh Humaydi Daham al-Jaraba, the head of an Arab tribal militia, is an outspoken supporter of Assad's government. Was appointed as the governor of the Jazira canton in Rojava in 2014. His son is now the commander of the Al-Sandid forces, one of the main Arab militias fighting along the PKK-led SDF, that is to say, Rojava's army. The prominence of tribal leaders preserves their role as inhibitors of social change. While PKK has officially renounced its demands for an independent Kurdistan, it would be myopic to ignore the ongoing military expansion of the territories controlled by the Kurds, whose outcome means the de facto fragmentation of Syria along new borders. Considering the rejection of the idea of nation-states in the Rojava Declaration, this appears to be a move in the opposite direction, regardless of the threat posed by enemies in wartimes. Moreover, private property is officially enshrined in the Charter, a provision that safeguards the privileges of landowners, while encouraging them to invest in agricultural projects sponsored by the Rojava authorities. In order to reflect Bookchin's views on how libertarian municipalism is expected to replace private property, the text should have been phrased quite differently. A just order. If this Syrian region is to stand as an alternative to capitalist federalist Iraqi Kurdistan, a significant effort is also needed to familiarize its inhabitants with its structures. When I was living in Rojava with a Syrian Kurdish family in 2013, most of the people I met were busy dealing with the rising cost of living and had no idea of the difference between federalism and libertarian municipalism. That's because there is no difference. They're both capitalist. People's houses, Mala, Jel, and Kermanji, communal places where people gather, were already open, but I discovered their existence by reading signs at their entrance, not because people mentioned it to me. Another threat posed to democracy and decentralization in Rojava is the PKK's Stalinist legacy. Oh God, he's fear-mongering about... Again, I have disagreements about Stalin, but Stalin did some good, but there are disagreements to be had with Stalin. The party claims to have shifted towards anarchism a long time ago, but some traces of its authoritarian upbringing are still visible in a Syrian lab. Öcalan's portraits are ubiquitous, often accompanied by the slogan, "There is no life without a leader." Bi Sirok Jayan Nabe. That sounds Indo-Iranian, not Semitic, okay? That's how you know they're not from Syria. And they're migrants from Iran, the Kurds are. The PKK supporters are not generally inclined to accept criticism of Öcalan, who has been portrayed by his former comrades as a despot. When I asked a PKK chief in charge of supervising education in Amuda, northern Syria, why he had decided to hang a party leader's portrait in schools, he told me that Öcalan was more a philosopher than a political leader. Unfortunately, in Rojava, Öcalan looks like the only philosopher allowed to be portrayed anywhere. I witnessed the PKK's worst crackdown on Syrian dissidents so far on June 28th, 2013 in Amuda, after the party's armed forces had killed 6 protesters the night before. It was the only main episode in a long stream of violations committed by the dissidents and journalists. Still, as a foreign journalist in Rojava, I faced almost no restrictions and was never at risk of being kidnapped, especially compared with some opposition-held regions in Syria. Nevertheless, the way the PKK deals with dissidents is worrisome for any movement claiming, with dissent is worrisome for any movements claiming to have established democratic confederation. The role of women. Lastly, women empowerment is undoubtedly part of the Rojava agenda. Civil marriages in Syria were introduced here thanks to new legislation. A woman's testimony was made equal to a man's in spite of widely accepted Islamic norms, where the presence of women is encouraged in both political and military institutions as nowhere else in the country. However, the militarization of women and society at large is an alarming trend enforced through conscription and sanctioned by social prestige enjoyed by the fighters' families. In fact, the only martyrs pictured are venerated with the same devoutness of Ocalan's icons. Consequently, women become worthy of respect as long as they turn into the men of arms and sacrifice themselves on the battlefield. Some would defend this militarized system of values with the current need to defend Rojava, but to assume that even minors should be forcibly enlisted to ensure the survival of a social utopia is a disturbing argument, to say the least. It should also be noted that European leftist solidarity cherry-picking the so-called Rojava movement, whereas other revolutionary theorists such as Omar Aziz and Damascus went completely ignored because they were neither endorsed by one of the best equipped militias in the region such as the PKK, nor did they phrase their social utopia according to libertarian terminology. Yet, ironically, structured self-governing bodies that were envisioned in Aziz's writings and established in opposition areas, held between 2012 and 2013, bear some similarities to Rojava communes, with the difference that the latter were spared from government shelling. The Rojava lab is definitely a politically innovative experience, but the social utopia narrative should not overlook the reality on the ground and its contradictions. Interesting. The YPG have suppressed dissenters. Amuda shouts, so this is Syria Untold. July 20, 2013, Amuda shouts once again, he who kills his people is a traitor. He who kills his people is a traitor. First chanted outside the Libyan embassy in Damascus in February 2011, and later repeated as a message to Syrian security forces who were shooting at unarmed protesters. This was one of the first slogans of the Syrian revolution against the fake revolution, the U.S.-funded coup against President Bashar al-Assad. Now Kurdish Syrians in the city of Amuda in northern Syria are using the slogan once again, this time against the PYD, the Democratic Union Party, which is a political wing of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK. Kurdish PYD forces recently arrested a group of activists who led the city's nonviolent resistance movement after charging them with a number of unfounded claims. In response, about 100 protesters held a sit-in on June 27th, condemning the actions of the PYG, who they accuse of denying people of their freedoms. They held signs with messages such as, Amuda did not kneel to Assad. So they're being bootlickers and to the YPG and stuff. And we will kneel to no one else. So they're being bootlickers to their oppressors, basically. The regime occupied Qusayr with the help of Hezbollah and occupied Amuda with the help of So these activists are still fucking bootlickers. No matter how you spin it, they're bootlickers. Through the coup, the attempted coup by the United States and the Zionist entity in Scotland, the PYD has been accused of collaborating with the Assad government, the democratically elected Assad government, and has helped the democratically elected Assad government silence the voices of members of opposition, which including the renowned Kurdish opposition figure Mashal Tamil, who was shot dead early in the coup against Syria. Again, this shit. So you can kind of get it. This publication is. It's kind of whitewashed to try to portray Assad as evil when Assad is not evil, but you kind of get the picture here. I'm going to spare you from this insufferable anti-Assad article. And then here you have this report of erasing Assyrians. Erasing Assyrians. How the KRG abuses human rights, undermines democracies, and conquers minority homelands. So the Nevenet Plan. The Nevenet Plain is the only region in Iraq where the largest segments of the inhabitants are Assyrians. The area is considered the original Assyrian homeland. So this is the Nevenet Plain. There's Mosul. There's Erbil. That's fake Kurdistan. Again, Kurdistan is fake. The Kurds are invaders from Iran. There's Kirkuk. There's Baghdad. Okay. On January 21, 2014, in a landmark movement for Assyrians and other minorities in the Negev Plain, the Iraqi Council of Ministers voted for the creation of 3 new governments in Iraq, among them a Negev Plain government. This new government would ostensibly serve as a safe haven for minorities, including Assyrians, while remaining part of Iraq under the authority of the central government. So see, the Iraqi government cares about its Assyrian citizens and even established a new government for them. So that would be like an ethnic autonomous region inside of a larger country, right? That's what that would be. So security in the Negev Plain. So you have Tel Kep district, and you have an Iraqi group. You have Al-Qosh. So they're outnumbered by these like Curtin Al-Qosh, Teleskaf, Bashika, and Batnaya by Kurdish forces, Kurdish extremists. And there's the Peshmerga trench line. And then you have the Bartella and the Kamrelash, Bakdida, and Nimrud here in the Al-Hamdaniya district. And so you have the Negev Plain Guard Forces, Negev Protection Forces, Babylon Brigades, Negev Protection Units. Interesting. So you have conquest masked as liberation, Assyrians in the Negev Plains. So that's what that goes into. Despotism masked as democracy, Assyrians inside the KRRI, so the Kurdish regional area. KRG responses to human rights violations. This is a long document. Let's see if there are any other graphics. And it would take me probably 4 hours to get through this, right? And these are the different parties. You have Abna al-Nahrain. You have Zawa, Atranaya, Bet Nahrain, the Syriac Assembly Movement, Kaldo Ashur Communist Party, and the Syriac Democratic Union. I'm going to go through this document later today and read this. So yeah. So this is a video of David Jendo, who was assassinated by the YPG, who was an Assyrian leader and commander. And he was a deacon in the Assyrian Church of the East. And he protected the region from Daesh.
أخنا إيوخ مطور زررو تثبيتاي الملديا المتوات الدين أخنا إيوخ ناطور يعني نطران يعني نطرح حقوياتا.
So they basically got screwed over by the YPG.
كو خالد قايل صار تشتكي ولا لا كل راس النيل كل أن رأت النيل رأت ساوي
يابا يعني أستاذ خدتي لك كنت أستاذ خدتي لك طب أخي أي أرى إلا ناشا قدم لي دمه قدم لي زادي قدم لي يعني بنداري ليه ما تخلي.
I mean, he's on a breathing tube, dude. So he thought he was cool with the Kurds, but then the Kurds, they murdered Jindo and they attempted murder against Nasser.
نان قد بيشتدي لخا نقيتلا بيشتدي لخا ليلة أختي قالم برسوبايت أنا نويا قابودي برسوبايت أنا تمن بشوق نواس أنا إن لا خد من ملدي إن لا خد من أمتدي إن لا خد من أرأدي إن لا دوقن بط أرأدي ويتون وقارن وجمن هل بطوب خليه آمر قالي مودي بايد أنا قرق أمر المودي بايد.
Man, 1966 to 2015. R.I.P. David Antar Jindo. R.I.P. man. That's hella sad, dude. And he spoke out against the looting of Assyrian towns by the YPG and their allies in the MFS. See what this brings us to. And this is from Joshua Landis, Romancing Rojava Rhetoric versus Reality. So this is Joshua Landis's. Who is Joshua Landis? Joshua Landis, Director, Center for the Middle East Studies, and Associate Professor at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. And this is by Max J. Joseph and Mardine Isaac. So let's get past the intro because we know what this is about. So here's their thesis. Their thesis is that there is extensive harassment and intimidation of Assyrians who resist the policy of the Kurdish self-administration. There's physical violence committed by both the PYD, Asayish, and Dauronoye Syriac Military Council, MFS security forces against Assyrians. Forced military conscription and parallel tax systems, the imposition of Kurdish nationalist ideology, and overhaul of the education system. Attempts at land confiscation and the annexation of Khabur by Kurdish nationalist forces. Manipulation of rhetoric and propaganda that seek to fully absorb the Assyrian experience into the Kurdish nationalist cause, as articulated by the PYD and YPG, paving the way for the long-term absence of any Assyrian representation outside or part of Kurdish self-administration. And he calls this the tyranny of optics, Kurdish politics in Syria under Western eyes. So it's optics and a facade of what the Western media writes about Rojava. So yeah. And we have a pretty good picture as from the articles that I've just read, the videos we've just watched and whatnot, about what's going on up there in northern Syria, or down there, I guess, relative to where you are in the world. So yeah, I want to just glean the important parts of this article. For sympathetic Westerners, attachment to Rojava goes a step beyond, further than assuaging war guilt or pursuit of tangible success in Syria. It is an attachment that often feeds into and affirms their own ideological positions and projections. Rojava's actors are frequently described as radicals, feminists, anarchists, communists, and so forth. Yet the observer of those terminologies rarely identify Rojavan actors as nationalists, since nationalism is viewed negatively among the proponents of all other labels. Bingo! This is 100% true, right? And this is why I oppose Rojava. I mean, we have enough evidence to build probable cause of Kurdish human rights violations and the attempted genocide of Yazidis, Arabs, and Assyrians in northern Syria and in northern Iraq. Like, we have probable cause to prove that. So Assyrians are increasingly leaving northern Syria. let's have a look at that, eh? So Syria Direct, Syrian Christians, exploited or protected minority. So this is written in Amman and Al-Ordun, Jordan. As the fighting raged in northeast Syria, in early October, fighters from the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army were given an unusual task, cleaning a church. As soldiers scrubbed the pews and plastered whitewashed walls in the small Armenian church of Tel Abyad in Raqqa province, they were broadcast on social media as proof of the SNA's commitment to protecting the minority Christian community of northeast Syria. Soon after, Turkish media published videos of the church being reopened and to worshippers and SNA soldiers returning artifacts to the previously looted by the SNA. The videos seemed to be a response to claim by the Kurdish-led SDF that SNA fighters were abusing Christians and even conducting forced conversions. The transformation of the small chapel into a media battleground between the SNA and SDF was indicative of a greater struggle between the two as they jockeyed for the role of Syrian Christians' protectors. However, at the center of this public relations campaign has left Christians feeling as if they're being exploited in an ugly way. The director of the Sweden-based Assyrian Monitor for Human Rights, Jamil Diyarbakerli, told Syria Direct. He commented that it was the PKK groups which utilized Christians for most of their soft power diplomacy, referring to the Turkish Kurdistan Workers' Party. Immediately following the Turkish offensive, there were 2 violent attacks carried out against Christians in the SDF territory. The priest of an Armenian Catholic church in Kamlishi, Ibrahim Hanna Bedoyan, locally known as Father Hovsep, and his son were assassinated in Deir ez-Zor while on a visit to supervise the restoration of a local church on November 11, 2019. On the same day as Father Hovsep's assassination, there were 2 car bombings in the city of Kamlishi, the de facto capital of the Kurdish-led Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, AA. The attacks targeted churches, shops, and hotels owned by local Syriac, Chaldean, and Armenian Christians, according to the Democratic Union Party, PYD, which is the AA's main political party. The PYD demanded that the international community, and in particular the U.S. and global coalition to defeat Daesh, handle their responsibility toward the constituent peoples of northeast Syria, who defeated terrorists on behalf of the rest of the world, and that they find a way to help protect these people. Despite the so-called Islamic State, Daesh claiming responsibility for the assassinations, questions were raised due to the fact that it occurred in SDF-controlled territory, especially since the FDS recently allied and cooperated with the Assad government. Vice President of Syrian Christians for Peace, Dr. Samira Mubayed, said. Again, so I think this director of Syrian Christians for Peace might be promoting a little bit of anti-Assad and anti-Syrian propaganda, because some Syrian Christians have a tendency to buy into U.S. imperialism. Not all of them, but a certain percentage, right? I don't know what that percent is, but, it is what it is, right? In addition to Daesh overcoming all of the security checkpoints, there were a number of unconvincing factors surrounding Father Hovsep's assassination, Dr. Mubayed told Syria Direct. The event reminded us of what Assad's government did for so many decades before. Again, I don't know if she's telling the truth about Assad, but I do know she's telling the truth about Father Hovsep's assassination, okay? Christians during the Syrian Revolution, in the early years of the coup, the illegal coup funded by the U.S., Damascus attempted to arm the Syrian Christian community, encouraged them to join all ranks of the government intelligence and security forces to form militias and defend from any further rebel assaults. However, the Christian community quickly rejected the entreaties of the government. Again, this article it's kind of a bit propagandized, but there are some valid points in it about Christians being targeted by the Kurds, right? So, we get the picture. Right? What does this link? So, Vladimir von Wilchenberg published a book promoting Simco Shakak, an Assyrian warlord who led several massacres against Assyrians and assassinated Syrian political figures such as the patriarch Marshimun. What does this bring us to? Oh, Assyrians under Kurdish rule, the situation in northeastern Syria. See if there are any graphics. Okay, there's Turkey. There's the Khabur region. There's Manajir, Tal Tawil, Tal Tamir, Tal Goran, Kharita, Tal Hormizd, Hasaka, right? See if there are other graphics that explain this. It's a long document. It'll take me about 2 more hours. What does this have? Pentagon watchdog. U.S. withdrawal in Syria damaged Kurdish partnership, hurt the fight against Daesh. So what does it say? Oh, okay. So with Syrian Democratic Forces and U.S. coalition operatives against Syria Daesh in Syria diminished, U.S. military intelligence and diplomatic agencies warned that Daesh was likely to exploit the reduction in counterterrorism pressure to reconstitute its operations in Syria. So that confirms that the SDF is being funded by the U.S. So Ankara rightfully considers the Kurds terrorists connected with Turkish Kurdish insurgency. Okay. So with SDF and U.S.-led coalition operations against Daesh in Syria diminished, I want to see, where does it say? Oh, Trump later decided to leave about 500 to 600 troops in Syria after Turkey invaded. Trump said the mission is to secure oil fields while the Pentagon insists it remain on focus on fighting Daesh. So Trump was being honest. The Pentagon was lying, but Trump's ignorance and his lack of filter, rather, not ignorance, lack of filter. His lack of filter kind of exposed the Pentagon's agenda here, you know? So the U.S. is funding the SDF. The SDF receives much of its arms from the U.S. and generally has depended on the U.S. support for its survival. That's what that article demonstrates, okay? What does this say? U.S. forces to stay in Syria for decades, say militia. So this is from the SDF's mouth themselves. So this is from Ain Issa, Syria. While DC's main Syrian ally in their fight against Daesh says the U.S. military will remain in Syria, northern Syria, long after the jihadists are defeated, predicting enduring ties with the Kurdish-dominated region. The U.S.-backed SDF, an alliance of militias dominated by the Kurdish YPG, believes the United States has a strategic interest in staying on, SDF spokesman Talal Silos told Reuters. They have strategic policy for decades to come. There will be military, economic, and political agreements in the long term between the leadership of the northern areas and the U.S. administration. The U.S. coalition against Daesh has deployed forces at several locations in Syria, including the airbase near the town of Kobani. It has supported the SDF with airstrikes, artillery, and special forces on the ground. Asked about long-term strategy, Colonel Ryan Dillon, spokesman for the coalition, referred Reuters to the Pentagon. He said there was still a lot of fighting to do, even after Daesh had been defeated in Raqqa. So it's not about Daesh, it's about the oil. And the U.S. is scared of Baathism, right? Daesh remained in the strongholds along the Euphrates River Valley, he added in reference to its stronghold in Der Azor province in the southeast of Raqqa. And they claim their main mission is to defeat Daesh in designated areas of Iraq and Syria and to set conditions for following on operations to increase fake stability in the region. So Ryan Dillon he's a lying sack of shit, and we know he's lying. So the YPG, so we already know that they dominated a swath of northern Syria, where Kurdish-led autonomous administrations have emerged since the onset of the illegal invasion by the U.S. in 2011. So new bases. So Silo said the Americans have strategic interests here after the end of Daesh, using a pejorative term for ISIS. And he said new bases, they have recently referred to the possibility of securing an area to prepare for a military airport. These are the beginnings. They're not giving support to leave. America is not providing all the support for free. He suggested northern Syria could become a new base for U.S. forces in the region. Maybe there could be an alternative to their base in Turkey, referring to the Incirlik Air Base. I think that's how you say it. The head of the YPG said last month the U.S. had established 7 military bases in areas of northern Syria controlled by the YPG or SDF, including a major air base near Kobani, a town at the border with Turkey. The coalition does not discuss the location of its forces, citing operational security. Reuters reporters have seen Black Hawk and Apache military helicopters taking off from a cement factory southeast of Kobani, a Kurdish town on the border with Turkey. D.C., under the new administration of Donald Trump, started distributing arms to the YPG in March ahead of the final assault on Raqqa City, infuriating Turkey, which has been successfully lobbying D.C. to abandon the SDF. Despite confidence that U.S. forces will stay, there is a concern that D.C. will not give enough backing to YPG allied forces and civil councils that control northeast Syria, and we're constantly asking them for clear public political support, Silo said. He said the U.S. State Department held its first public meeting with SDF officials this month. At the moment, there are no meetings being held for a real discussion of Syria's future. There are initiatives for developing political support for our forces, but we hope this will be bigger. So that's pretty condemnatory that the U.S. is funding the SDF and the YPG. See? Oh. So, Newsweek 90. Official who heard call says Trump got rolled by Turkey and has no spine. Again, take it with this is Newsweek, so this is from Newsweek. From James Laporta. So, Turkey is Newsweek granted the National Security Council official anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the matter publicly. Bullshit. They should be required to discuss it publicly. Let's see, where is this? I want to find this. Oh, the National Security Council official that spoke to Newsweek said, to be honest with both of you, it would be better for the U.S. to support a Kurdish nation across Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, said the National Security Council official. It would be another Zionist entity in the region. Pretty condemnatory. Zionist settlers acknowledging their fraternity with the outposts of Rojava. So, why Rojava matters to the Zionist entity, and this is by Jonah Nagy, who is a Hungarian Zionist squatter. That's pretty condemnatory. Let's see who this guy is. The Syrian Kurds, the Zionist entity's forgotten ally. This is by Rauf Bakr. Noam Chomsky. The United States has produced very few anti-imperialists. Noam Chomsky is not among them. And this is by Stephen Gowans. So in a recent intercept interview with the beautiful soul Mehdi Hassan. Oh God, beautiful soul. What the fuck? Hassan's a clown. Fuck out of here with that shit. Noam Chomsky resumed his efforts to recruit the political left into a scheme to support U.S. imperialism. In the interview, Chomsky spoke about his reasons for trying to organize for the opposition to the withdrawal of U.S. troops in Syria. U.S. troops ought to remain in Syria, he said, to deter a planned Turkish invasion and to prevent what he warned would be a massacre of the Kurds. Yet weeks after Turkey moved into northeast Syria, nothing on the scale of massacres had occurred. The high-profile anarchist, former champion of international law, and one-time outspoken critic of wars of aggression, supports the uninterrupted invasion of Syria by the U.S. forces, despite the fact that the invasion is illegal and contravenes the international law to which he had so frequently sung paeans. But the principles he once upheld appear to have been sacrificed to the higher goal of defending the anarchist-inspired YPG, the Kurdish group which had sought and received support from D.C. to establish a Kurdish mini-state in Syria in return for acting as a Pentagon asset in the U.S. war on the Arab nationalist government in Damascus. In this, the YPG recapitulated the practice of political Zionism, offering to act as a muscle in the Levant for imperialist sponsorship of its own political aspirations. For Chomsky, the desired end state, what he would like the political left to rally in support of, is the restoration of the status quo ante, namely robust U.S. support for the Kurd mini-state in Syria. DC's illegal military intervention has been a guarantor of the YPG's aspirations to create a state on approximately one-third of Syrian territory. A YPG state east of the Euphrates would be an asset to the U.S. imperialist project of expanding DC's already considerable influence in Western Asia. A Kurd-controlled state under the leadership of the YPG could function as what some have called a second Zionist entity. As Domenico Losurdo put it in a 2018 interview, in West Asia, we have attempted to create a new Zionist entity. The Zionist entity was an enclave against the Arab world, and now the U.S. and the Zionist entity are trying to realize something similar with the Kurds. That doesn't mean to say that the Kurds don't have rights and that they haven't been oppressed for a long time, but now there's the danger of them becoming the instruments of American imperialism and Zionism. This is the danger. This is the situation, unfortunately. To make the U.S. invasion more palatable to the U.S. to the political left, Chomsky misrepresents the U.S. aggression, a small scale guided by lofty motives. A small contingent with the sole U.S. contingent of the sole mission of deterring a planned Turkish invasion, he says, is not imperialism. Bullshit. But the occupation is neither small nor guided by a mission limited to deterring a planned Turkish invasion. Either Chomsky's grasp of the file is weak, or he's not above engaging in a spot of sophistry. Last year, the Pentagon admitted to having 2,000 troops in Syria, but a top U.S. general put the number higher, 4,000. But even that figure was, according to the Pentagon, an artificial construct, that is, a deliberate undercount. On top of the infantry, artillery, and forward air controllers the Pentagon officially acknowledges as deployed to Syria, there is an additional number of uncounted special operations personnel, as well as untallied military troops assigned to classified missions and an unspecified number of contractors, i.e. mercenaries. They're all fucking mercenaries. Additionally, combat air crews are not included, even though the U.S. air power is critical to the operation. Therefore, there are many more times the officially acknowledged number of U.S. troops enforcing an occupation on parts of Syria. Last year, the U.S. invasion forces in Syria, minus the air crew located nearby, operated out of 10 bases in the country, including a sprawling facility with a long runway, hangars, barracks, and fuel depots. In addition to U.S. military advisors, U.S. Army Rangers, Artillery Special Operations Forces, satellite-guided rockets, and Apache attack helicopters, the U.S. deployed U.S. diplomats to create government and administrative structures to supersede the legitimate government of the Syrian Arab Republic. The idea of the U.S. policy circles was to create a soft partition of Syria between the United States and Russia along the Euphrates, as it was among the Elbe at the end of the Second World War. During the war on Daesh, U.S. military planning called for YPG fighters under U.S. supervision to push south along the Euphrates rivers to seize Syria's oil and gas-rich territory located within traditionally Arab territory. While the Syrian Arab Army and its allies focused on liberating cities from Daesh, the YPG under the U.S. direction went after the strategic oil and gas fields, holding these on behalf of the U.S. government. The U.S.'s president's recent boast that we have secured the oil was an announcement of a long-standing fait accompli. The U.S. has robbed Syria of two of the largest oil and gas fields in Deir ez-Zor, including the Al Omar oil field, Syria's largest. In 2017, the United States plundered Syria of a gas field and plant known in Syria as the Conoco gas plant. Though its affiliation with Conoco is historical, the plant was acquired by the Syrian gas company in 2005. Russia observed that the real aim of the U.S. forces, incontestably denominated illegal presence in Syria, has been the seizure and retention of economic assets that only belong to the Syrian Arab Republic. The point is beyond dispute. The United States has stolen resources vital to the Republic's reconstruction, using YPG to carry out the crime, and this from a country which claims property rights to be humanity's highest value. Joshua Landis, a University of Oklahoma professor who specialized in Syria, has argued that by controlling half of Syria's energy resources, the U.S. is able to keep Syria poor and under-resourced. Bereft of its petroleum resources and deprived of its best farmland, Syria is hard-pressed to recover from a war that has left it in ruins. Wow. To sum up the notion that the U.S. occupation of small scale is misleading. The Pentagon acknowledges that it deliberately undercounts the size of its contingent in Syria, but even if there are few U.S. boots on the ground in Syria, as the military is prepared to acknowledge, that still wouldn't make the U.S. intervention trivial. U.S. boots on the ground are only one part of the occupation, not counted are tens of thousands of YPG fighters who operate under the supervision of U.S. ground forces, acting as the tip of the U.S. spear. These troops, it should be recalled, acted as muscle for hire to seize and secure farmland and oil wells in a campaign that even U.S. officials acknowledge is illegal. Another part of the occupation, completely ignored by Chomsky, is U.S. air power. Without U.S. troops and their YPG force multiplier, it would be unable to carry out their crimes of theft, occupation, and theft. U.S. fighter jets and drones dominate the airspace over the U.S. occupation zone. Ignoring the significant role played by the U.S. Air Force grossly distorts the scale of U.S. operation. What's more, Chomsky's reference to the scale of intervention as an anodyne is misdirection. It is not the size of an intervention that makes it imperialist, but its motivations and consequences. Additionally, Chomsky completely misrepresents the aim of the U.S. occupation. Its mission, amply documented, is to sabotage Damascus's reconstruction efforts by denying access to revenue-generating territory, to provide D.C. with leverage to influence the outcome of any political future settlement, and to block a land route over which military assets can easily flow to Tehran, from Tehran to its allies, Syria and Hezbollah. In other words, the goal of the occupation is to impose the U.S. will on Syria, a textbook definition of imperialism. Again, Chomsky is a Zionist, right? Chomsky as a young Zionist. This is by Chomsky on his own freaking website. So Chomsky admits he was connected to a considerable part of the Zionist movement. Again, he's a Zionist. Let's see. So, let's see, where does it say? Because there's I don't know why people give him a platform. But he lived on a kibbutz. I want to see... Let's see. Chomsky is just as satanic as Howard Zinn. Let's just play this clip. This is from Al
What's
Jazeera.
happening right now is very striking. This is the first time, really, that Israeli leadership has openly broken with U.S. leadership.
They're not really breaking. They're just evolving to match U.S. leadership. Chomsky is a Zionist who is trying to deceive you.
The new administration.
So this is by, I don't know why, who is this Eliyahu Friedman? So I don't know why Al Jazeera lets Zionist squatters write for them, because Eliyahu Friedman sounds like a Zionist. So let's see. Chomsky. So let's... Avram Noam Chomsky was born on December 7th, 1928 in the East Oak Lane neighborhood of Philly. I bet you it's a wealthy... East Oak Lane is a neighborhood at the northern end of North Philly Planning District in Philly. Many of the houses in the neighborhood are large single homes or twins built at a later period than much of central North Philadelphia. There is also a significant number of typical Philly row houses. Historical background. This area of Philly was first settled in 1683 as William Penn's first neighborhood. In 1695, a Welshman named Griffith Miles bought 250 acres of land and built a log home along the dirt road, which would be known as Oak Lane. Doesn't tell us about present times. Demographics. So it's a mostly Irish and German Catholic, but it's a wealthy neighborhood. So Noam Chomsky went to grade school at Oak Lane Country Day School, a progressive and lively K-8 private school whose students were for the most part Jewish. So Zionism and elitism. Okay? So his parents, William Chomsky and Elsie Simonovsky, were Jewish immigrants. William Chomsky. Zeev Chomsky, born January 15th, 1896, Kupil, Volhynian Governorate, Russian Empire in present-day Ukraine. And his daddy was a professor. From 1924, Chomsky additionally taught at Graz College. So he was born in Kupil in Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine is technically part of Russia. After immigrating to the U.S. in 1913, avoid serving in the Tsarist army, he worked in sweatshops in Baltimore before gaining entry employment teaching at the city's Hebrew elementary schools, using his money to fund book sales, to fund his studies at Johns Hopkins University. After moving to Philly, Chomsky became the superintendent of the Mikveh Zionist entity religious school from 1923. So he's from a wealthier family. So after moving to Philly, William Chomsky became principal of Congregation Zionist Mikveh Religious School and joined the Graz College faculty. So this synagogue, which is a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, in Philly. This is where Noam Chomsky's dad worked. Noam's only sibling, David Eli Chomsky, was born 5 years later and worked as a cardiologist in Philly. Money, right? Hella money. The brothers were close, though David was more easygoing while Noam could be very competitive. They were raised Jewish, being taught Hebrew, and regularly involved with discussing the political theories of Zionism. The family was particularly influenced by the fake left Zionist, so liberal fascist, writings of Ahad Ham. So labor Zionism is still Zionism. Still Zionism. They call for the second Aliyah, which is basically the genocide of Palestine. Labor Zionism was responsible for the creation of institutions in the Zionist entity that exist today, such as the IOF, the Zionist Offensive Forces, or ZOF rather. A majority of immigrants at the time. So the predecessors of the IOF began as an underground militia. Bullshit. I don't believe Wikipedia here. To commit genocide against Palestinians. The first Aliyah was met. Oh, so the Rothschilds founded the first Aliyah. So again, Chomsky's a Zionist, okay? Chomsky is a Zionist. You can't be a Marxist Zionist. Okay? You can't. That's like being a Marxist Freemason. That shit doesn't exist, right? Chomsky has described his parents as Roosevelt Democrats. You know what Roosevelt did? You know what Roosevelt did? Roosevelt interned Japanese people. Yeah. So that's sus. So Chomsky became absorbed with the 1939 fall of Barcelona and suppression of the Spanish anarcho-syndicalist movement. So he likes the LARPers in Catalonia. And why am I qualified to speak on the LARPers in Catalonia? Well, a lot of my Spanish ancestry is Catalan. And my ancestors ruled the city of Barcelona. So, yeah. So Chomsky's obsessed with the LARPers in Barcelona. So, yeah. And then Chomsky, at the age of 16, began a general study program at University of Pennsylvania, and he explored philosophy, logic, and languages, and developed a primary interest in learning Arabic. Well, now, why would he want to learn Arabic? Maybe because Chomsky would want to commit genocide in Palestine. Living at home, he funded his undergraduate degree by teaching Hebrew. Hella sus, right? Frustrated with his experience at the university, he considered dropping out and moving to a kibbutz, so an illegal Zionist settlement, and kibbutzim are illegal under international law in mandatory Palestine. But his intellectual curiosity was reawakened through conversations with linguist Zelig Harris. Well, I'm guessing he's related to Sixers owner and Crystal Palace owner Josh Harris. Philly, Zionist, just saying. Josh Harris, maybe? He's somehow related to 76ers and Crystal Palace owner Josh Harris. I mean, how can he frickin' not be? Bloomfieldian. So, and he was a Zionist. So he was involved. So Zelig Harris, the advisor of Chomsky, was also a Zionist, and he was involved in a Zionist cult called Avuka. He Avuka the hookah, right? Seymour Bell. Avuka the hookah, right? So he faced, so according to Chomsky, he faced anti-Semitism as a child, particularly from Philly's Irish and German communities. I don't know if he's telling, I don't know if he's playing victim or is he telling the truth, eh? With Chomsky, it's hard to know, right? In 1947, Chomsky began a romantic relationship with Carol Doris Schatz, who he had known since early childhood. They married in 1949. Chomsky was made a fellow at Harvard, moved to the Allston area of Boston, remained there until 1965, when they relocated to the suburb of Lexington. The couple took a Harvard travel grant to Europe in 1953. So Harvard fucking funded Noam Chomsky to live on a kibbutz. And he enjoyed living in Hashomer Hatzer, who is a Zionist criminal from Hungary. His Hazoreah kibbutz, which, again, kibbutzes are illegal settlements in Palestine. So what Chomsky did constitutes a war crime, and I'd like to see him locked up in prison while in Palestine, but was appalled by interactions with Jewish nationalists. Bitch, Chomsky's a Jewish nationalist. Again, of course, he read a LARPer, a Zionist LARPer from Barcelona. This is why, even though, given my family roots in Barcelona, I don't really rock with Catalunya, you know, because they're ethno-fascists there. So, Chomsky's clearly a Zionist criminal. Chomsky's a Zionist criminal. So the fact that Chomsky is praising the genocide of Assyrians in Rojava, Chomsky is an anti-Semite. Chomsky is of Slavic Russian descent. Chomsky is anti-Palestine. He's a Zionist war criminal. Palestinians are Semitic. Russians are Slavic. Chomsky is he's the real anti-Semite. If he's against Assyrians, if he's against Arabs, if he's against Palestinians, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Chomsky is a Christophobe and a anti-Semite, okay, as well as an imperialist. Oh, and also Chomsky was funded by the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which is the CIA front group. So to all you Rojavists out there, and I know there's certainly a lot of Rojavists are full of shit, right? Again, fuck The Intercept. I hate The Intercept, by the way. I just clicked on this because this was a link. The U.S. is now betraying the Kurds for the 8th time. Yeah, both the U.S. and the Kurds are ops. So fuck the Kurds and fuck the U.S. So there you go. And all you Rojavists are full of shit, and you're a bunch of Zionists and a bunch of Freemasons and a bunch of imperialists and capitalists. Anarchists are just capitalists in disguise. Anarchists are fucking Freemasons and Zionists in disguise. So I'm a Marxist, I'm anti-Zionist, and I'm anti-capitalist. So there you go. There you go, guys.